Dakota, face forward, please. Get your notebook out. Everybody done with the 5-number summary? So go ahead and turn to the table of contents. We're on page 39 for today. And we're going to be talking about percents, decimals, and fractions. And the converse of that, or the inverse of that, is to write decimals and fractions as percents. So once we've got that written down, let's flip on over to page, 39? Get ready for our notes. At the top, fractions. Decimals. And percents. So who can tell me what a percent means, like in general, like what does it mean? Drew. That'd be expressed as 50%. What are percents out of? Haley? They're out of 100. So today we're going to talk about percents. And just a definition of percents is a ratio that compares a number to 100. So first, today we're going to talk about writing percents as fractions. To write a percent as a fraction, we have two steps. Dakota, face forward, please. Dakota, face forward, please. Okay. So, to make a percent to write a percent as a fraction, take the percent and place that value over 100. So we're going to take that number that is written as a percent, and we're going to place that value over 100, because a percent is a ratio that compares a number to 100, right?
Yeah.
So we're going to want to compare it to 100. And our second step is to simplify. So taking a look at an example, let's say we have 14%. What shall we do with it? How are we gonna adjust this and write it as a fraction? Reagan? We're gonna put 14 over 100. So now we've done the first step. What's our second step? Can we simplify this? Go ahead. Safi says we can divide it by 2. So when we're going to do that, what is that going to look like? 7 over 50. Can we simplify that anymore? So now we've taken 14% and written that as a fraction. On your calculators under your desk, do we all know about the N over D button? So just a reminder, we have 14 over 100. We have our N over D button, and that'll simplify it to 7 over 50. So the N over D button is in the second column, third row.
It clears it up.
So on your calculators, we have the N over D button. Everybody, we're good on that? That'll help you simplify. That'll help you simplify your fractions.
What if you don't have a calculator? What are you going to have to use? Your brain? Your brain.
You can use a calculator online if you don't have your calculator, but you could do all this by mental math. By, like we saw, 14 and 100 are both divisible by 2, and use those divisibility rules. So now we're going to write percents as decimals. To write percents as decimals, we will also have 2 steps where we will take the value and place that number in the numerator of a fraction with 100 as denominator. Tommy, everything all right? So take value and place in numerator. Of fraction. with 100 as denominator. So we're going to take our percent, place that over 100 for our first step. Our second step will be to divide by moving the decimal 2 spaces to the left. So why are we going to move it 2 spaces to the left? Because 100 has 2 zeros and we're going to be dividing by 100, so we need to move our decimal 2 spaces to the left. So let's take a look at an example here. We have 4.5%. So what are we going to do with this 4.5%? We're going to make it a fraction with 4.5 as the numerator. So we have our 4.5, and what are we putting that over? 100. And as Reagan said, we're going to move our decimal 2 spaces to the Y. Because there's 2 zeros in the number, or 2 zeros in 100, which means we need to move it left because we're dividing it. So we have our 4.5, and then we need to move our decimal 2 spaces to the left. Now creating our decimal of 0.045 for our 4.5%. Is this making sense, or we need another example? Another one? Okay. So another example, let's say we have 54%. What are we going to do with that? We're going to put it into a fraction. So we have 54 over 100. And why is that, Michael? So our decimal was originally right here, and we're going to move it 2 spaces to our left, creating 0.54 for our decimal, which is equivalent to 54%. Okay. So now we've written percents as fractions and percents as decimals. Now let's work backwards and write decimals as percents. So, once again, we're going to have 2 steps. So when we're writing decimals as percents, what do you think we're going to do? Haley? Anshima? We're going to identify the decimal, and then what we're going to do with it. What do you think? Safi? We have a decimal, we're going to make it a percent. We're going to move the decimal. Joshua, is that what you're going to say? So, for writing decimals as percents, we're going to move the decimal how many times? 2 times which direction? Which direction? Left or right? Right. We're going to move the decimal 2 spaces to the right. And our second step will be to rewrite the new decimal as a percent.
You guys, are you moving to the right this time? Because it's opposite of what you just did.
Sorry, Tyson, I couldn't hear you. I just couldn't hear you.
You're undoing what you did.
So the second step is rewrite the new decimal as a percent. And don't forget to put your percentage sign in there. So let's say we had 0.463 as our example. Step 1 says what? We're going to move our decimal 2 spaces to the right, which will now give us 46.3. And what do we need to remind ourselves to do? We need to write it as a percent. So why? Because we're working backwards. Why do we need to move it to the right? What makes it moving it to the right? Right? So what does it mean we're multiplying by? Yeah, what does that mean we're multiplying? We divided by 100 before, so what are we multiplying by here? So we're multiplying it by 100 to move the decimal 2 spaces to the right. This is kind of like the scientific notation we worked with a couple weeks ago. Does that kind of make sense? So we're going to move it to the right because we're moving from a decimal to a percent. So now we're going to write fractions as a percent. So to write fractions as percents, first we need to divide that fraction and find the decimal value. So when we're moving from fractions to percents, we need to divide the fraction. How do we divide a fraction? How do we divide it though, Triana? One more time. The vent's very loud, I'm sorry. So when we're dividing, you said change and flip? So Tyson says divide the numerator by the divide the numerator by the denominator, right? Does everybody does that make sense? Yeah. Numerator divided by denominator. So we're going to take the numerator and divide it by the denominator when we're dividing fractions. So after we found the decimal value, we're going to write out the decimal and identify where the decimal is. So write out the number that we found and identify the decimal. So what do you think we're going to do after we have identified the decimal and we're trying to make it a percent? What did we do last time when we were moving decimals to percents? We're going to move the decimal 2 times here as well. So pretty much after you get to this step, it's what we just did. So the third step is to move the decimal 2 spaces to the right. And lastly, what is our last step? What do we think? We're going to rewrite the new decimal as a percent. Make sure we don't forget our percent signs. So let's take a look at an example here. Tommy, Michael, Milla. Let's focus on our notes, please. So let's look at 7 over 19. That's our fraction. So what do we need to do first? We need to divide our fraction. So 7 divided by 19 gives us 3.684. So what we're going to do is we're going to write the first 3 numbers. We're going to round it to the nearest thousandth for our purposes with this. So round to the nearest thousandth unless the directions in the homework say otherwise. So we're going to write 0.368 because that's rounded to the nearest thousandth. So now we've done step 1 and step 2. And now these problems look like a